Welcome to Tebra Talks, the podcast for people keeping independent healthcare running. I'm Miriam Datskovsky, healthcare marketer, content strategist, and longtime observer of what actually drives change in this industry. On this show, we talk candidly about the realities of running a practice or medical billing company, what's changing, what's working, and how real people are navigating it all while keeping their doors open. Today, I'm joined by my favorite medical biller, Aimee Heckman, a certified billing and practice management expert who spent 30 plus years helping physicians keep their independence and protect their revenue. In this episode, we'll cover the biggest workflow gaps, automation wins, and real world fixes to reduce denials before they happen. Welcome, Aimee.
Thanks, Miriam. It's great to be here. Really appreciate it.
So in this episode, we're going to cover the biggest workflow gaps, automation wins, and real world fixes to reduce denials before they happen. So before we continue, why denials? Our latest billing survey found that 76% of financial leaders say denials management is their most time-consuming task. But we know that most denials are preventable. So, Aimee, knowing that, before we dive into solutions, can you tell us about a practice you've worked with recently where denial prevention made a dramatic difference?
Probably the most dramatic one was a client that I picked up a few years ago, and they had, I think it was something like $150,000 or $200,000 on their receivables that was way past due. And I wish I could say I was able to recover all of that for them. We weren't, because some of it was beyond timely filing deadlines. There was just a lot of reasons. But where we were successful with them is identifying what caused them to get into that position in the first place. A big part of it was a credentialing problem. They weren't credentialed properly. We identified that. Their previous billing company hadn't been able to figure out why they weren't getting paid. So we identified the problem. We got their credentialing issues resolved. We were able to recover, I think we were actually able to recover about $75,000 to $100,000 for them, which we were a little surprised. Those were things that were not necessarily credentialing related. But I would say the biggest win there is, this was probably at least 5 years ago. They're still a client. They're doing great now. All of our KPIs are where they should be. And, they made it through COVID. They made it through all of this stuff and have grown now. And so I think the key takeaway from that is, if you can get to the root cause of the problem and you fix that, you prevent that hole from just continuing to get bigger.
Yeah. I like that you use the phrase root cause because, as you and I have talked about many times, a root cause is poor front desk hygiene. Someone picking up your phone can sabotage your claims downstream. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about ways that can happen and what to look for.
Absolutely. So I am a big believer that the front desk position is one of the most unrecognized and underutilized positions in the revenue cycle management process. It's a challenge for those of us who have billing companies because we don't control that part of the team, that one really key piece of the revenue cycle process. So we do a lot of training, offering our clients information, helping them with best practices. But, the most common rejections and denials, and there's a difference in that, the rejections mean the claims never even gotten to the payer. And those are very commonly eligibility issues. They're not checking eligibility often enough or doing a thorough enough job. I have seen practices where they don't even ask for the insurance information until the patient shows up the day of the visit. You absolutely should be getting that information well ahead. When the patient first schedules an appointment, get the insurance information. That's where the process needs to start from. So that front desk person is the gatekeeper. They are the key to a good revenue cycle. Getting a copy of the insurance card and their driver's license to make sure that it's the right one, make sure that it's valid. Demographic information. You get a wrong date of birth, those claims aren't going to go through. And again, the critical piece is if it gets rejected before it even gets to the payer. I hear people talk a lot about timely filing and proof of timely filing. Timely filing, you don't get to stop that clock until the claim has actually made it into the payer system. And so this is why it's one of the most important pieces of the revenue cycle to get that claim information, get the demographics right, get the insurance information right, make sure it's a valid policy, make sure you know who the subscriber is, all of those pieces that happen while everything else is going on at the front desk. They're trying to collect copays and they're trying to do all of this other stuff. But I can tell when a client has turnover at the front desk based on their denial and rejection rates. I don't see it until I'm running invoices at the end of the month, maybe. And I go, wow, why did this practice's revenue go down in the last 2 or 3 months? And I look at what our denials are, or I ask one of the team, they're like, oh yeah, they got a new front desk person. So it's an absolutely critical role, underappreciated a lot of times. It's usually the lowest paid position in the company, but it controls your revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, eligibility, documentation. We have another doctor who recently said that anytime a returning patient walks through the door, the staff is trained to ask any change in insurance or address.
Glad you brought that up, because that is a key aspect of training that we recommend for front desk. Don't just ask, has anything changed? Because everybody's going to say no. Go through that list and say, is your address still this? Is your insurance still this? Is your phone number still this? Like, how you ask the question is as important as what you're asking, because everybody's just like, nope, nothing's changed. If they haven't been in 6 months, they may not even remember, oh yeah, my insurance changed with my job. So that's a
Yeah.
really good point.
Yeah. So we know that, training gaps lead to this inconsistent coding and poor payer compliance. But I think, as you said, that those staff members are the least well paid and often undervalued, which is not great. So what do you recommend to practices in terms of staff training and really empowering that staff member to both, to do their job properly and care?
Yeah.
If there were a
So
checklist, for example, what would you say?
there's a few things. One is provide training, period. Because a lot of times they're just thrown in, here's your desk and here's how we answer the phone, and do this. Maybe they get a little software training. And it really starts before you've even hired that person. Have documented policies, procedures, SOPs, you know, down to even scripts. I recommend, how do you want someone to answer the phone? Even going back to what we just talked about, what is the best way to ask somebody to verify their demographic information? Even if somebody has worked in another doctor's office, don't assume they did it right there. Have a way that it's done at your practice, have it documented. Checklists are great. What do you need to do when scheduling a new patient? This is the information that you need to ask them for. What do you do 2 days before, a patient comes in? Are we doing eligibility verification? Hopefully, you've got an automated system that is automatically running eligibility at certain intervals before the patient comes in. But in some cases and in some specialties, they may need to manually check eligibility for specific benefits. So training is key, and making sure that you're cross training so you've got somebody for backup, because this is another thing that we notice is if the front desk person is out suddenly, even just for a couple of days, it can totally throw a practice off. So have some redundancy, and we're starting to get more tools that we can use that can automate and that can kind of back those people up and allow people to focus on the tasks that can't be done by a computer, can't be done in an automated way.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you bring up automation and the fact that we can automate eligibility verification so
Yeah.
that that front desk person can be trained to focus on the more complex manual eligibility. But I want to dive a little deeper into automation, given how much is going on and how much payer complexity there is these days,
Mhm.
unfortunately. Where do you see automation being most appropriate, being best leveraged in order to keep up with payers and the volume of claims that practices have coming in?
Yeah. So sometimes it's helpful to look at what the full revenue cycle is, kind of that patient visit cycle, And so obviously you've got when the patient first makes that appointment, whether they're brand new or whether they've been in the practice before, eligibility verification, having the ability where you put them into the system, and as soon as that information is in there, your system should be able to automatically run, an eligibility check. Either manually, they push a button and it goes out and finds that information, or it's part of a batch. Again, needs to check it right before that visit again as well. So eligibility is a big piece of it. Payment posting is another piece, kind of going all the way to the other end of the visit. Automating as much of that process as you can. And there's a little balance there, because I'm a little bit old fashioned. Even if a system can just completely post everything, unless there's a way for it to kind of flag denials or flag underpayments or some of that kind of stuff, I like to have somebody's eyes on it, a human being that kind of understands that. I'm excited about some of the technology I'm starting to see that may have the ability to do that, whether it's, generates a report that says, hey, these are out of, the norm. Somebody needs to take a look at it, those kinds of things. And really the goal should be to get as many claims through the entire
Mm-hmm.
process from the time the practice has seen the patient and we're ready to generate that and bill to the insurance. Your goal should be to get as many claims through without somebody having to touch it as possible.
Yeah.
And if you kind of set that goal and then just chip away at little things that you can find, whether it's through the practice management software and the EHR, whether it's through a third party, that can do kind of that robotic posting or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is, it's not with the goal to eliminate human beings. It's not so that we can just fire all of the, billing staff and do all that stuff and just have the computers do it. That's never going to be the goal. My goal as a billing company owner, a practice manager's goal as someone who does in-house billing should be to reserve those human resources, which are getting harder to find and much more costly, for things
Mm-hmm.
that only a human can do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my goal, is how do you grow without having to exponentially just keep adding people. And I've seen kind of these tools that are available now where you can teach basically a little bot. If it's something that you can document with screenshots, you can teach it how to do it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's both a little bit terrifying and really exciting to see some of the stuff that's coming out.
Yeah. Well, and I think to put it in context, data says that medical billers spend 25 to 75% of their time on repetitive admin tasks. So imagine
Yep.
what the ROI would be if we take those tasks, automate them, and give them the time to deal with that specialty.
Absolutely. For the ones that don't get worked because you don't have time because
Yep.
you're doing all the other stuff. Like, again, it's not the idea of how do I eliminate having to pay people to do their job. It's only have to pay them to do the things that only they can do.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. There are a lot of good places you've hinted at where we can use automation and sort of different entry points. So, we've got, as we've talked about a lot, eligibility verification, there's claim
Mhm.
scrubbing software, there's payment postings, and there's RPA, which can do all sorts of uncomplicated bot work. What would you say, if a biller were to start with one tool, where would you start?
But honestly, the claim scrubbing is probably one of the most important, is making sure that you have that. Hopefully that's a basic feature in your billing software already. And ideally, if you can add rules to it, or really fine tune that a little bit, because again, that leads back to that goal we talked about of being able to get a claim out the door without anybody having to actually touch it.
Mhm.
But even if we have to touch it, it is much more cost effective and efficient to do it before it hits the payer system. So
Mhm.
yeah, we'd love all of them to go through, claim scrubs it, they're all clean, but even if you have to interact with that and say, hey, this one needs a modifier, or that diagnosis code isn't a valid code as the primary code, catching it before it gets to the clearinghouse and then out the door to the payer is a much more efficient
Yeah.
process, because it takes 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds to fix a claim before it goes out the door. It takes a lot more time to appeal a denial.
Yeah. 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 All about denial prevention. And
Mm-hmm.
imagine if someone had been able to scrub the fact that your client wasn't properly credentialed. So far now.
Yeah. I mean that we won't even go back to that because they really should have known. But
Ah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Claim scrub it shouldn't
Yep.
even gotten to claim scrubbing, but yeah.
As we've discussed, it's the small changes now that
Yep.
can prevent massive revenue loss later. And with the sort of two key places to start being proper front desk and automation. Is there
Yep.
anything that we didn't talk about with the front desk or with automation that you'd want to hit on in addition for preventing denials?
The front desk, just again, having documented processes, making sure, give them the tools they need to do the job. So give them the training and then give them the tools, and that could be the, eligibility verification. It could be, ongoing training as well, so things like making sure that, and I like to, whether it's a practice that does the billing in house or it's a practice that maybe is a client of ours that we're working with, communicating so that everybody is aware. Not, it can't be siloed where only the billing person knows what's going on with a particular insurance company or a particular, issue that you're having. The front desk person doesn't necessarily need to know all the details about the games that this particular insurance company is playing or what they're doing, but they need to understand why what they do is so important. I'm a big
Mhm.
believer in educating people to understand, why does it matter if you get a copy of the insurance card or not? Well, if you don't get a copy of the insurance card and we do get a denial because it, said that it went to the wrong payer, it takes longer to figure that out. We have to chase down the patient to get a copy of the card. Sometimes people write things down incorrectly, and missing one number or transposing a number makes all the difference in the world. So I think that's probably one of the more important things, is just make sure that people understand why it matters what they do.
Mhm.
Because, not everybody's going to step up, but I really do believe most people, if they understand that what I do impacts the doctor's ability to pay me and to pay the rest of the staff, I might take it a little more seriously and honestly take a little bit more pride in what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. Thank you for being with us today, Amy. It's great to talk about denials prevention starting way before a claim goes out the door and the small changes now that we've identified to prevent massive revenue loss later. We invite you to download Tebra's free denials management playbook to calculate your denial cost and get step-by-step fixes at tebra.co/denials-playbook. And next episode, we're talking appeals, how to fight back and win. So we'll see you there.